Hi, I'm Sai. Welcome to my video channel called Nuggets of Wisdom. I'm here in a beautiful cottage in a lovely place, ready to discuss something I think is probably really important to discuss. And that is, I have spent quite a bit of time and effort on a sort of seeking journey, on a path. Some people call it a spiritual path. But on that path, I have kind of, consumed every possible thing I can consume with respect to knowledge. So I've read as much as I can all the religions, the Sufis, the Gnostics, Judaism, the Catholic religion, the Bible, the Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita, I can never say that properly, the Upanishads, all the Christian mystics, fascinating Christian mystics, the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of Jesus, spiritual teachers like Ramana Maharshi. It goes on and on and on. And from that experience of probably reading hundreds of articles, books, and watching numerous videos, there's one area, specific area, that I was very interested in. Like most people, I was interested in the nature of God. Who is God? What is God? Is there a God? And I just want to give you a little insight into what I discovered. I'm also keen that you can see that, for starters, I'm not really associated or enmeshed in any kind of doctrine. So even though I come from an Irish Catholic background, I'm not enmeshed in a Catholic background. I wouldn't say I'm a practicing Catholic. Also, my Catholic upbringing in Ireland wasn't terrible. It was quite nice, to be honest. And school was very, it wasn't obsessively religious. I actually really loved singing in the choir, which was all sorts of hymns and so on. But I never really took it seriously, to be honest, as a kid, especially when I grew up in an era in Ireland when science and technology and the country's economy was sort of really important. So as children, we were encouraged to learn all this sort of scientific disciplines. And there was quite a lot of contradiction there. And I would say to you, by the time I reached sort of my teenage years, I had probably very little interest in Catholicism because from my sort of growing intellectual ego mind, I would have said, but this is all nonsense. It's just a tradition. It's just what my parents and my community believe in and so on. And then I think when I went into adult years, I kind of got focused on other things. And I would say I kind of became a sort of intellectual scientific atheist. So, unless there's evidence, unless there are experiments, unless there are formula that can prove the existence of a God, I'm not interested. That's very much, in many ways, the nature of some dogmatic scientists today in the world. And then as I got older and had children, and I think started to appreciate the beauty and the wonder and the awe of the world, I'd say I became a sort of a lapsed atheist. So basically, I was like, yeah, there's something amazing here, but I don't know, and I don't really care. And so when I progressed in my life, it had some difficulties, like everybody's health difficulties, relationship difficulties, work difficulties, and I got a few little nudges. I then went on this seeking path, and the seeking path was really, who am I? I need to find out the nature of everything. And so I read all these books and I watched all these videos. And then I came to a point this point where I would say now I'm not a seeker. I have got no interest in seeking. But I think the seeking process was a good process because intellectually I was able to learn about lots of really interesting people and discover their teachings. But I realized on that path that the tools of intellectualism can only go so far, and that my basic perception that intellectualism was kind of the dominant tool in the world was very flawed, and that understand anything about the nature of human beings and who we are and what we are, and having any idea of any of this, that the intellectual toolkit is limited and comes to a point where it just doesn't have really any use, unfortunately. The current intellectual toolkit through the scientific method. And not all science. Science is such a diverse range of perspectives from everywhere. And some scientists are very religious and others are not. But true science is curiosity. True science is about turning miracles into repeatable tools that we can use. And we see in the world today there's incredible scientific miracles. And then looking at miracles and new ideas and breaking the boundaries when it comes to understanding the nature of the world, to add, to make it more positive, make it better, and so on. So improve lives, improve health, all that sort of stuff. That's my view of what science should be. And I respect science from the point of view that you really have to have some sort of scrutiny. I like the idea of scrutinizing. Basically, you can say, hold on a second here. Why do you believe that? What is the outcome from that? Where is your evidence? It's all pretty good. But as I say, I think science can only go so far, and then it gets into the weeds or into the swamp, and can become its own worst enemy. Because there's limitations to everything. And sometimes there aren't answers. And sometimes probably science has to break out of that kind of dogma to find new templates, new ways of looking at the world. Open its vision of what is out there. Like the blind man and the elephant. Basically, start to listen to all the other blind men and then start to look at new ways to observe and to sort of think about what the nature of existence and everything else is. And so, in a way, that's kind of what I did. So I'm an engineer, I've got a mechanical engineering, designy background. Everything I do is very sort of practical in many ways, very mathematical, very scientific. And so, obviously, what I did was read all these books and then do a whole pile of analysis and investigation and weigh things up. And what I discovered from reading these books, I think was quite fascinating, really. So what I discovered is that there are lots and lots of perspectives coming from completely different places that are kind of merging in the world. And we're at a point in society where it's actually becoming more and more visible, so that you don't really need to get into a major argument about proofs, because the evidence is overwhelming. So, for example, if you look at Christian mystics who are kind of pre the current Roman Catholic Church, and a lot of these Christian mystics lost their lives because what they were saying was not the dogma of the church at the time could not accept it. If you look at the Sufis, if you looked at mystical Jews, the Hermetic principles. If you look at especially Buddhism and Hinduism and the teachings of the Buddha. If you look at quantum physics, which has been around, I don't know exactly, but you're talking about since the 20s. And the quantum physics and how at odds it is with conventional Newtonian physics. So if you look at Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, and then also modern spiritual teachers who are often not scientific, and some well-respected modern scientists who are really interested in spirituality, what you realize that there is a kind of there is a kind of a convergence. And that convergence, I would say, from my investigation, this is only my point of view, is that the conventional arguments about religion, about a God and the world being created in 7 days and all that sort of stuff, the kind of Roman Catholic view, is not... There's some great words and pieces of wisdom in every religion. But the Catholic religion and the modern religions of the world, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, I think are quite dogmatic. But if you look at the teachings of those religions, especially the mystical parts, you start to realize that there are nuggets of gold in there. And of course there are nuggets of gold, because that's probably why millions of people for generations have been interested in these religions. What's interesting as well is if you take a character like Jesus, he's so popular with all religions. There's something about this man, whether he did or didn't exist, but there's something about this archetype, this person, this spiritual teacher, and what he said that has major resonance with so many diverse people, from Buddhism to Hinduism to science. That's very interesting to me. The other thing that really interests me is the Eastern philosophies. I mean, they're not religions really, but the Buddhism and the Taoism and the Hinduism fascinate me, because what they teach, it's very experiential, so it's very difficult for the intellectual mind to get a handle on it. Now, I believe now it can't. I think the intellectuals of the world, sort of the intuitive right brain and the left brain intellectual, they need to come together and they need to grow and expand. And I think that those philosophies, and the Buddha and so on, and Lao Tzu, incredible wise people and incredible insights into the nature of everything, that to me resonates so much with modern, say, quantum physics. And you'll hear people slate this and they'll say, oh, you know, spiritualists always want to talk about quantum physics because they're trying to... No, there's incredible linkages, there's incredible convergence between quantum physics and the Eastern philosophies. And you know, these things are thousands of years old, whereas quantum physics is only really around for the last, since 1920. And in all honesty, it was only really proven through the scientific method in the last couple of years that you could start to argue that time and space and matter are not fundamental, that there's something else behind that. And I also find it fascinating that some of the really interesting scientists, and one of those is a guy called Bernardo Kastrup, who's a philosopher and a computer scientist and worked at CERN. Another one called Donald Hoffman. There are lots out there. These guys are willing to talk to spiritual teachers, talk to, Rupert Spira, who's was a potter, but is it's kind of a spiritual teacher, but a very wise and interesting man. They're willing to start talking to each other. They're willing to delve into the quirkiness and strangeness of quantum physics and the teachings of the spiritual leaders throughout the generations, and today's spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle. And they're also willing to admit that they don't know stuff, that they could be wrong, that they need to open up their minds. So they're all very open-minded. And really, what it comes to for me is I'm not a lapsed atheist anymore. I would say, based on everything I have read and all that stuff, I'd say the closest I would be to attaching any tag to myself is that I have an understanding and respect for something called idealism. And so there are lots of different sort of modern takes on the nature of belief. And you have materialism. And materialism is pretty well known, and a lot of scientists would be dogmatically materialist, which is this idea, reductionist idea, that everything is made of stuff. And you drill down through the atoms and the molecules and everything, and eventually get to the God particle. And that thoughts and consciousness are all emergent properties from this. They can be quite nihilistic in the sense that they say, we're just machines, we're meat machines. And often that, well, everything's predetermined and there is no point to it's all accidental, it's all just statistics, it's all just probability. And often some of the dogmatic scientists are very, very, very keen to try and latch on to anything that will prove there isn't a God or a God force. So you hear about something called the many worlds interpretation, where basically they try to say, this universe or this world is just an accident of the throwing of a dice multiple times. It's just statistically it had to happen, that all the conditions for us just came about accidentally. But what happens is everybody gets to a point, whether you're spiritual or religious or scientific, that there's a boundary you get to where you cannot prove right or wrong what you're saying, or it's very difficult. Very easy to prove things within the scientific Newtonian science of the world. You drop a ball on the ground and you can prove that the next time you drop it, it will drop at a certain acceleration. It takes so much time to hit the ground. You can start predicting when that ball will hit the ground, depending on what weight it is. But when you start to get to these questions about the nature of everything and the existence of a God, it gets more and more and more difficult. And often some scientists will say, well, in a few decades' time, we will be able to prove that there is or there isn't a God or whatever, or that our view of the world and our view of the universe and how it works will be proven to be correct. If you look at something like, say, the James Webb Telescope, which is this incredible telescope that NASA launched, I think it's 1 million miles from the Earth, and it's able to see into the furthest reaches of space. It's giving established science and the scientific understandings of something called the Big Bang. It's giving them all a big headache, because what it's doing is it's showing that the models by which and the understandings by which science has been able to peer and look into the universe and decide what it thinks is the nature of how the world came to be and all that sort of stuff, that has to change, because they're discovering things that just don't basically fit in. And then the whole idea that our universe just came from this big bang, something the size of a pea or an orange or whatever it was to what it is now, even that could be interpreted as woo-woo. It may seem true, but where did this big bang come from? How did this big bang occur? How could everything come from nothing, basically, when it comes to material, some tiny, tiny amount of material? So you can sort of argue that everybody is trying to basically come up with some understanding of the nature of everything and whether there's a God or not. It gets more and more difficult the more we learn, the more we see. And really, you have to get to a point where people are willing to open up a little bit more and listen to other perspectives. It's back to the elephant and the blind man. Each blind man sitting down and discussing his perception of what he's touching, and then they start to reach a consensus. So for me, idealism is the most interesting. And basically, idealism, and this is a shocker, idealism basically is trying to say that everything is mind. That we're kind of in a dream. That the world is a dream. That everything is a dream. That there's only one. And that basically there is one something or other that's unexplainable. And we're all individuated consciousnesses. And consciousness being the awareness of being aware. Our ability to navigate the world with this awareness that's always there. It's very kind of counterintuitive. It's very difficult to grasp because everything feels so real. And people would say, oh, well, if the world is such a dream, then try walking outside and in the middle of the road and see what happens when you get hit by a car. Well, reality is that if we were all in a game and we're playing a game and I drove my car into the middle of a road and something crashed into me, that'd be the end of me in the game. So the nature of reality is really being called into question. What is reality? And when you start to connect this idea of this idealist view of the world, of the universe, of existence, with Eastern philosophy, with quantum physics, you start, I think mystical Christianity as well, and other mystical religions, you start to clearly see that there's a real connection between them all. And that's why at the moment, I think if I was to put my hand up and say the best bet when it comes to gaining a better understanding of existence, of who we are, of God, all that sort of stuff, would be through the collaboration of Eastern philosophers, old and new, the scientific community. That's the scientists that are highly qualified but very open-minded, willing to embrace other ideas, especially the Eastern philosophies of the world, and also the people who are have got very strong knowledge and skills associated with quantum physics. So particularly quantum physics. And so what does that mean for me? Where do I stand? So do I believe in a God or not in a God? Well, the interesting thing is I don't really care about that. I did. I think the ego mind, my ego and the persona was created, that reflected this, this sort of outward expression of who I am, Simon the engineer, the Irish guy, the father, whatever. That really wanted to have some sort of connection to a God or a God force, to say, when I die, I'm going to go to a heaven, or there's another life, another existence for me, or I'll continue on, or I get reincarnated, or whatever. But when I realized that incredible, wonderful, useful persona wasn't really the true me, and that it was just basically a load of thoughts, I realized that it probably isn't that important. But to the ego and this sense of self that we create with this persona, it is very important. So I got to a point where I realized that it's not that important, it's a tool. And it probably doesn't have a standalone existence. It's a bunch of memories and thoughts and programming. And perhaps when I pass, it's gone. At one time, that would have really upset me because I was so meshed in my ego. Now, I don't care. It's like, as bad as it sounds, you have a lovely car. You know, I had a lovely little sports car, hardtop sports car, and one day the engine failed, and it was my pride and joy, and I kept it so clean and tidy and washed it all the time. It was like part of me, it was my identity. But I eventually got to a point where I said, it's just a car. It's lovely, but it's just a car. And when the car failed, I had a few bad moments. I had a few sad moments about it. I felt a little bit bad for a day or two that my lovely car was going to be crushed up in a machine, and that was the end of it. But I was like, it's just a car, and I'll get another one. It's fine. When you're enmeshed in ego, the idea that there is no existence past this one is very disconcerting, and it drives us to constantly seek to find out what is it, what's beyond the stars, and even worse, it drives the ego to think it can actually create a god, and I think that's really what's happening with AI. We think we can create this god that will take care of us like a father and will tell us what to do. So once I got past this ego thing, that took a lot of anxiety and stress out of everything. I was less keen to seek. I was much more open to these new ideas, looking at things in a different way. Yeah, could we all be living in a dream? You'll find a lot of scientists say we might live in a simulation, and they it's kind of this idea that there's somebody sitting at a computer and we're all inside a computer. That's really, from my point of view, idealism is not about that. It's not about trying to take a human concept and say we're all in this little simulation. Although, as humans, we'd like to create worlds, whether it's the metaverse or some computer game or an experience with a headset or whatever. We like to do creative things with our minds, create worlds with our minds. So I got to this point where basically I didn't feel enmeshed in my ego, and I was able to let go. In many ways, surrender. I was able to surrender to this idea that my ego may die. My ego is just some thoughts, programming, and it'll disappear. Is that a problem? No. But I was open to the idea that everything I do, every experience I have, which my ego is a part of, and my persona, that like a ripple in a pond, they may be part of this collective, information that never dies. So I'm open to that, but it's not important to me. The other thing that became really interesting for me was I started to experience and feel that there's more to me, there's something to me, this awareness that is kind of unknowable. I can't describe it. I can't use my intellectual mind to say this is what it is. But that there's something more to me than just this body and these thoughts and all that sort of stuff. And then I read a lot and I listened a lot and found all sorts of beautiful stories and perspectives, especially from Buddhism, Taoism, about what that may be. And people like Ram Dass, Allan Watts, modern teachers that are able to sort of express this to the Western mind. And then I spent time with very interesting people. Some interesting monks who meditate for long periods of time, who don't say much, but clearly have a lot of wisdom and understanding and knowing about the nature of things. And so I ended up at this place what I call surrender, where I actually don't really care at the moment. I'm not really concerned about finding out if there's a God or there isn't a God. I would say that just being here in this experience, just being here, just being, is more important to me, and experiencing and enjoying and having a positive experience in this amazing world. But deep within me, there is this knowing that there's something incredible going on. All of my sort of seeking and all of my studies led me to a place where I'm in awe at everything around me, at the world, at, a leaf on a tree, and, the sky, a blade of grass, a flower. I now have this kind of deep knowing that I'm in something really incredible. And in many ways, that's enough for me. I also have a knowing that this incredibleness, this unknowable, whatever it is, it's not a sort of a force, something that just doesn't care about anything. It creates things just on a whim, or it's accidental, or it's all programmed, or it's clockwork, or it's just probabilities, and they were all meat machines just aimlessly wandering, and that when we die, that's the end. I just don't buy into that anymore. I'm not arguing that people who have these ideas are wrong, but I would say if you look at what I am not, one of the least credible arguments is the typical reductionist materialist argument. The arguments that we have been fed ourselves, which are the sort of very simplistic religious arguments about a God, a person up there, rules and regulations, and if we do the right thing, we'll get credits in heaven. Or the scientific view, which is quite nihilistic. I think they've got less and less and less credibility. And if I was having a big discussion and got people into a room where we could sit down and try and figure some things out, I think those people and their arguments would probably be more of a disruptive force to a positive, open, let's all just think laterally. Let's all just, not just think, let's be. Let's look at the experiential stuff that goes on. I think often those people would be a block to that, and probably would be the people that I would be constantly trying to say, look, let's okay, I understand what you're saying, but let's open up a bit here. So for me as well, what has it done for me in my life, having this kind of, this feeling, this sense, this knowing that this amazing experience that I'm in is amazing. First of all, it makes my life very simple because I can enjoy pretty much anything. I don't need lots of stuff. I don't need loads of things. I can really appreciate just a simple experience in nature, just observing something, just sitting in the quiet, being on my own. I can be on my own and not be lonely. I don't need things or people, but I love people. I think people are so amazing and so much more beautiful than they can possibly, most of them can even imagine. So this overwhelming feeling of the beauty of the world, of the amazingness of everything, is there in me all the time. And it kind of creates a fate. I have faith that whatever happens after I pass, it's probably going to be incredible. And so, like everybody, I sort of have, obviously have questions about what happens after we die. But it's not something that I'm really focused on. It's not something that makes me fear. I don't have a fear of dying or a fear of death. In many ways, I feel it's like Passing for me will be just going on a completely new adventure into something that's currently unknowable to me. I also have a very strong sense, it's very experiential, I can't prove any of it, but I have a very strong sense that all the people in my life who I had strong connections with, who I loved, who I cared about, who I respected, all those people who have passed, that they're still here, that there's an essence that's still here. And that essence is undescribable. It's like they are me and everything else, and I am them. I'm not giving you a very straightforward answer here. My answer is all about surrender, faith, recognizing that there's an infinite intelligence of some sort. Intelligence isn't even the word. There's an infinite something incredible. Intelligence is a very human concept. And I think that's the other problem. Words, it's very difficult with words to basically try and articulate these things. But just purely from an evidential point of view, it's clear that all the different perspectives in the world, from science to biology to neuroscience to near-death experiences to psychedelics, the spiritual teachings, some of the nuggets of wisdom in religious teachings, the mystics, it's clear that there is a pattern from that. And that pattern kind of comes to the place that I've been trying to describe, not very well, trying to describe to you for the last few minutes. So, fear and survival are very important drivers in the world that often create a lot of anxiety. And I think, it's really interesting. The fear of dying is such a big element of existence. You watch almost everything that we do in life, and it has a kind of, it comes back to some sort of fear of death. Whether we're worried about safety, we're worried about getting viruses, whether we're worried about injuries, we're worried about healthcare, whether we're worried about crimes and murders and everything else, we're worried about it just goes on and on. Our worries often, and the things we do in life, are heavily associated with the idea of dying or the fear of dying. Once you get to a place where you just don't fear any of this stuff, because there's no justification in fearing something that you don't really know, and where the evidence that once your body passes and you die, the evidence that we're just meat machines and we just basically, end up in darkness for eternity, that these things don't really have any credibility with what we know today. And I believe the credibility is getting less and less as we almost start to unpack the wonders of this incredible experience. The credibility of these fearful arguments just withers. And so you can get to a point in your life where, without knowing, having faith, you can live in this incredible experience. You can enjoy the simplest of things. You don't need constant validation. You don't need to know stuff. You don't need to have the drugs of life, alcohol, cigarettes, experiences, technology, food. You don't need to be enmeshed in these things to feel good, because you can feel good with nothing. You can feel good and feel peaceful just sitting outside underneath a tree, like the Buddha. And if you look at Margaret Perret and her story, that was pretty much where she was. She ended up almost annihilating this self, this her presence in her ego, her persona in the world. It was almost annihilated, where she literally was just peaceful, just being. And she didn't need anything. And so that is such an incredible gift for anybody in their lives. And the more incredibleness of this is that, lots of people would look at me and probably say, well, what's he talking about? Well, I will put some links on this video to amazing people Not crazy people dressed in robes performing sort of, witchcraft. I'm talking about incredible scientific people who are well respected, incredible spiritual teachers who you could only but respect. Even if you disagree, you could only but respect them. And you will see where I'm coming from. And the joy that I have that these people actually have been, have given us the gift of their wisdom and continue to give us the gift of their wisdom, because they're constantly coming up with new ideas and constantly talking to each other about their perspectives. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope this was useful to you.